We are live. This is Pitchdeck Asia, broadcasting to all of Asia and beyond, sharing with you some of the most interesting, exciting, and out there startups in the amazing Asian startup and Pacific startup now. All of the members from Asia. We'll count Australia in that as well, the Asia Pacific Rim. Let's not get political. Today we've got a special guest coming from Australia, so Chang from FAB9. Welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
It's great to have you here. We were just chatting off air about your plans as well. So we're going to dive into that, learn a little bit about FAB9, learn a bit about your dream factory, learn a bit also about the whole, this whole conversation about education and skills people need to adapt. I mean, this is a conversation people are having now. And I think the crisis, if we can call it that, has expedited this conversation. What kind of skills do we need to adapt? So I'm looking forward to that. A little bit of context as well. You didn't know this, so I'm going to ambush you with this information. Today was the day, talking about making stuff, today was the day that Levi Strauss was granted the patent for the rivet pocket jeans. I know a lot of
Niners,
there you go.
Yeah.
That is the thing that has lasted 120, 150 years. I know gold rushes may come and go, but it's the tools, the people that make the railroads, the shovels, and the jeans that survive. So Hans, I believe I can put you in that category as well. That tooling is up, whether mentally or having the physical tools to adapt to the new environment of what's needed. So shall we begin? And before we jump in as well and talk about what Hans is bringing to the table, hello to everybody here who has joined us live on the show. If you're watching on YouTube, please put in the comments your thoughts and any kind of feedback as well. If you know Hans as well, say hi. If you're joining us here live now on Zoom, then please say hello. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're listening on archive, if you're listening on iTunes or Spotify, please subscribe, follow Pitchdeck Asia, and also go and check out Hans Chang and some of his projects as well. So, top of the hour, Hans, welcome. Thanks for joining us all the way from Melbourne, Australia. Before we get into the business aspect of what you do, let's jump in. Let's talk about, I'm going to pull up slide 11 from your pitch deck. Let's get straight to the point. Let's talk about the Dream Factory.
Right.
So, that really had me excited when I saw that page on your pitch deck. It said everything, just the title itself. And for those, bear in mind, that aren't seeing this, please describe what we're looking at.
Yeah, so the Dream Factory has a great story. It was built over 100 years ago. Was as a rubber factory. Was definitely a manufacturing site. And most recently, it was the headquarters of Lonely Planet from the 90s until around 2016. And then the ownership changed. So Lonely Planet, as you know, didn't transition into digital fast enough. And you can say that it's been disrupted by Google or a bunch of TripAdvisor-like websites for travel. So the building has been transformed into more of a, you can call it innovation hub, with a co-working space on level 2, and then we operate a makerspace on the ground floor.
So what we're seeing here at the top level, this is part of the Dream. This is the whole building here. You've got co-working space level 2. Okay. So it's got a history here.
Yes.
And now you have taken over this space. This is
on the ground floor. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what part of? I'm not familiar with the area of Melbourne that you're in, so maybe you can describe what's the sort of local area. Is it an industrial area? Is it a bit revitalized area?
So we are just across the river from Melbourne River, and as you can see, it's a lovely brick building.
Yeah.
For people who haven't been to Melbourne, I would just describe where the kind of the Brooklyn.
So that's a more of a creative, artistic area.
Yes, that's correct.
There's a real diversity of different businesses and ideas.
Yes.
You've got the engineers and you've got the creatives coming in one space, right?
Correct. And like Brooklyn, Footscray or the west of Melbourne has more of a industrial background, working class people. They were Toyota used to manufacture cars in the West. And I think the manufacturing industry has been on a decline over the last 30 years in Australia. And the concept of makerspace is to, basically make technology such as 3D printing, laser cutting, more advanced technology available to anybody to experiment and make. So in the hopes that we can spur innovation for people making physical products. So I think that's kind of the original vision. Yeah.
You had the vision. When did the vision start? And take us back to the moment where you had the conversation with somebody else. Who was that conversation with? Who pitched the idea of the Dream Factory? And, what was the genesis of that idea? How did it come about? Why did you decide? Because it's a risk, obviously, to build this space, to make it reality.
Yeah. So when I was working in San Francisco Bay Area, in South Bay, or people know it as Silicon Valley, I was very intrigued by this maker movement, and this was back in 2011 to 2015. And I was a member at a local makerspace called Take Shop. Some people may be familiar. And I really enjoyed the community. I really enjoyed being part of a wider community. So in the Bay Area, there are many people who are extremely creative, also, have an entrepreneurial spirit. And I actually enjoyed it so much, and I was quite naive at the time. I thought I could start my own. I was looking all over the world to see.
This is whilst you're in the Bay Area, you thought?
Yes. So this is back in 2015.
But that naivety is sometimes a good thing, right? That
absolutely. I think
people tell you can't do something, but the naivety, like the Steve Jobs style naivety, really, isn't it? That why not?
Yeah.
Why can't I do this?
Yeah, I think as a first-time founder, you have to have that kind of initial passion and not knowing enough. I didn't understand how difficult it would be to get on this journey, right? And I was looking all over the world. I evaluated places in Asia, in Europe, in Australia. I wanted to come back to Australia, New Zealand. So Melbourne seems to be the right place. And because of there's many makers in Victoria, people who work with their hands, essentially. We have quite a kind of broad definition of a maker. Essentially, say, for example, if you cook, right, with your hands, then you're a maker. There's other people in the community who have more of a technology slant to this definition, 3D printing and maybe coding. I think anybody who uses hands to make things, I think, can be called maker.
So you're an electronic engineer by academic training, right? That was
Yeah.
your background. So why is it of benefit to you to be standing next to somebody who's cooking vegetables, or to be over there with somebody who's a maker of, let's say, audio equipment, or manufacturing wood, or whatever it may be? Why do you need to be around those people, and what's the benefit at that level? Because often people think that you should be around people with the same kind of skills as you.
Right. So this kind of goes back to some of the early days of the Silicon Valley story. People may have heard of the HP garage, or the famous Steve Jobs story where he started in his own garage, and the homebrew. I think it's called Homebrew Computer Club, right? In Palo Alto. I think a lot of people think companies must be like born out of this kind of amazing big bang, and there's big company, and it's not like that, right? It usually starts with people who's tinkering with technology, usually people who have a lot of passion, starting out as hobbyists, and they surround themselves with various different type of people. So I think there's a kind of a sense of creative energy you will have by interacting with people who don't have the same background as you. And I think that this kind of community of people who are supportive and contributed ideas. Again, I think it's not just about technology. If you think about all those successful hardware product companies, they usually have some type of design, right? So industrial design, it has to look beautiful. It cannot just be functional anymore. Those were the days in the PC era, right? In the 90s.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think the bar is a lot higher. It not only have to function, it also has to be fit for purpose. It has to look good. It has to interact with you in a way that enhances your user experience. So I think we're gonna have to come back to more fundamentals around, learning and creating and using the process as a way to inform you in terms of the next iteration.
Yeah, there is a lot of precedent, isn't there? And when I know you're a fan of people like Clayton Christensen as well, and so we'll come back to some of that, input into the whole idea about innovation and the culture of innovation
Right.
and how that sort of manifests as a space as well. If you were to go back to, let's say, for example, Kodak, and it's an often used case study, isn't it? That Kodak actually invented effectively digital cameras in 1974 when one of their young engineers walked into the management office with this camera,
Yeah.
which was the size of the old, if you remember the old TV sets, which had the backs on them, these things that, were weighing 50, 60 kilos. And he walked in with his camera and he said, I've invented this thing. And it obviously ran on tape at the time, but it could reload a tape to a screen in like 100 by 100 pixels. And then management said to him, that's cute, Steve, but don't tell anybody about it. And the moral of the story really is that Kodak could have been in the mobile business like Apple today, but because it had that lack of diversity of opinion in the sense that everybody there was focused on selling photographic paper, they didn't have people who came in and said, right, I've got no interest in selling photographic paper. I'm interested in what is important for this customer or this design. But they had that monoculture, and that it had only people who knew one product and one function, that became so brittle as a model that when the market changed, they were just completely wiped out. So there's this real need, isn't it, for creating a culture where you have somebody who works with you, again, going back to the chef or going back to the woodworker or somebody building robotics, that it may not feel functional working with them because you're not all kind of having the same opinion and getting stuff done together, but they may challenge you because they may say, actually, I don't see it like that. That's not how it works when you're cutting vegetables or you're 3D printing, right? So how does it work with yourself? I mean, tell us about some of the stories with your dream factory. What did you make in there yourself? And, where did you have those kind of aha moments where you thought, I never seen it like that before? That just sort of really, in a way, challenges my 20 plus years of experience in electronic engineering as well.
Yeah. So I see a lot of interactions amongst the members. Before COVID-19 hit, we were operating as a membership-based model. And this is a good story. Again, I'm using examples of maybe not so technical. So I have a member, she makes baby bow ties for little girls. And she just started organically. And it's one of those entrepreneur who accidentally become entrepreneur because I think she has some big following on Instagram, and then people started asking her, and then she started a subscription service of baby bow ties, and it's become actually quite a not only viable, it's actually quite a profitable business because she essentially doesn't have to acquire new customers. It just grows organically, and she comes to our makerspace and she used to cut those the fabric by hand, right, scissors, and then we helped her to kind of come up with a new way to cut a fabric on our CNC. So CNC stands for computer numeric control. So you can imagine a drag knife cutting a pattern of the fabric, right? So our technician, our staff were working with her, and instead of cutting by hand one at a time, she could actually lay a few layers of fabric and get a machine, cut hundreds in a matter of a few hours. So so she was able to outsource parts of the manufacturing. She still does as a hand finish, right? So the sewing part is still hand finish, but she's able to outsource some of the manufacturing process to the machine, right, to gain productivity or scale. So that's a great story, because a lot of people who don't necessarily think about entrepreneurship in the sense of like anybody can do it. They aspire to the big companies like the Google and the Apple and typically technology, but it doesn't have to be. I think if you solve a real problem and you have kind of this emotional connection with your customers, and you create this experience, right? So the baby bow tie is actually not about the product, but it's a monthly subscription. So it's about the mom having a bonding time with her little girls. And you actually see the mom's wearing the tie. I mean, baby bow, the tie, bow ties herself, right? So it's really clever because it creates an emotional attachment to the brand. And I think Australia and New Zealand, I'm a New Zealander, have many people who can create businesses given the opportunity and some coaching, right? Because I think entrepreneurship is often misunderstood in this part of the world. Many people are just more risk averse, or they just say, oh, it's not for me.
Or they don't understand what entrepreneurship is. Like you say, they look at, for example, the billion-dollar unicorn companies and assume that that's an entrepreneurship. Yet what you're talking about, and especially as a skill moving forward the next generation, the next 20 years, entrepreneurship really is a skill rather than a career choice, isn't it? It's almost like it's about taking risk and creativity and making decisions, isn't it? And
that's correct.
The accident. I like the fact you use this word accidental entrepreneur, because there's almost a generation of people that if you were to go back, let's say to our parents' generation, and you were making those bow ties, you would have done it in the back of your house, the hobbyist, and it may have been something she may have sold like 20, 30, and she may have had her parties where she invited all her friends around, like the Avon style parties, and sold to her friends. However, that wouldn't have become a business. So there's a lot of people who didn't understand that they had this way to grow and to service a bigger market, because firstly, entrepreneurship was this exclusive group of people, these sort of tech startups, and they had to become $1 billion company. And B, they didn't have the tools and the access to the markets as well. And this is really important, because that second part is often these communities that people like yourself, Hans, are building, right? And they're in a way not, what's the word, intimidating. It's not like I have to go to this startup accelerator and I pitch an idea. And yet I think for a lot of makers, they not really of that kind of mindset. They just make stuff and they enjoy it and they love it. And if I can make this for 1 million people, that's fantastic, right? That's not why they're getting into the game to build $1 billion company.
That's correct. And I think also there's not enough education around product entrepreneurs. So there's a lot of content around, say, building a website, building an app, right? It's not no code. It's quite easy now to do kind of your MVP, a website within a few weeks or a few days. It's not the case for a physical product entrepreneurship. And I think one thing you touched on is really the infrastructure in terms of e-commerce, in terms of promotion on social media, in terms of global logistics. There are actually companies who have already built this amazing supply chain infrastructure. So you can get your product from Melbourne to almost anywhere in the world using some of those either third-party fulfillment or by, fulfilled by Amazon. So I think a lot of people are not aware of those capabilities. Again, massive global platforms and plugging into that, kind of global commerce, right? I think many people can do really well if they can craft a niche. And I think that's what we're here to help, to kind of promote entrepreneurship in a way that make it more accessible and more um, kind of demystify a lot of some of those things. So
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
give people kind of this role models as, hey, if they can do this, you can do this as well. And I think the other thing about the skill set, I think it's around a mindset, because if you think about the future of work, many people are now freelancing, working with different projects. They're now more project based, right? Or gig economy. You kind of have to think about how you add value to the ecosystem, and it's not just you, right? So, for example, if you do graphic design and you list yourself up as a graphic designer on one of those, work for hire websites, you're
Yeah.
competing with the world, right? You're competing with somebody in Africa, Middle East, North America. So, and that's if you look at the education system today, they essentially give you some theory about about skill development in terms of the technical skills, but they don't teach you how do you market yourself,
Mm.
how do you do contract negotiation, how do you do client management. A lot of those kind of practical experiential learning that's not provided in the current education system. Um, and I think the world has changed, and there needs to be more communities or formal, what I would call it, informal learning opportunities for people to gain those skills and have been surrounded by people who share knowledge freely. So,
Mm.
leveraging what's already been done. Um, you know, this kind of open source community in both technology and also kind of business acumen. Not a lot of people are very open about coaching people and making content available so anybody can access it. So I think knowledge right now is free,
Yeah.
right? If you can you think I cannot think of anything that you cannot learn on YouTube, from
Yeah.
language to cooking.
Why would you pay to go to university in many aspects now?
Yeah,
People
that's
ask the
just
question, right? Especially like in the current situation with lockdown,
right.
where they're still charging fees.
Yeah, people are
Yeah.
not happy because they operate on a legacy business model. They
Yeah.
still have this attachment to that kind of beautiful campus,
Yeah. Yeah.
model. Every university in Australia is modeled after Cambridge.
Exactly. Well,
They
let's bring
still,
up this. Let's bring
yeah,
up this quote because there's a really interesting quote that you have in the pitch deck, which is on slide 3, which is a Clayton Christensen quote, because this really sort of frames what we're talking about here. So if we can bring that up, um, yeah, this is a Clayton Christensen quote. Obviously, Christensen famous for the innovator's dilemma. I'll just
yeah,
read it out here. He says the new market disruption is an innovation that enables a larger population of people who previously lacked money or skill. Fast forward, targeting non-consumers who formerly could not afford or access it. And in many ways, what we're talking about is giving people the key skills here to make this possible. So what you've done in building what you're building, for example, with the Dream Factory, and we'll talk about education as well towards the end of this podcast, is give people the necessary skills to access often supply chains, capital, resources, and knowledge they formerly couldn't have access to. And if you think about it, you mentioned as well, like for product entrepreneurs now, they exist and they compete in a very competitive market, a global market for sure. But yet the real upside of that is that if you can make it, you have Amazon FBA, for example, you have Amazon's distribution channel and drop shipping. You don't have to build a warehouse. You don't have to manage massive inventory. You don't have to worry about getting it in Woolworths or Walmart. You don't need to do that anymore. And then on the other side, you have Instagram, like you mentioned, the lady who's manufacturing the bow ties. Those Instagram businesses, they can easily find a following, a very niche following as well on Instagram. So they don't need to get on TV. They don't need to get on radio. So if you were to marry up on the one side Amazon, on the other side Instagram, the key now is this middle part, which is, okay, now I need almost like the emotional support of this community of people. Like, say, Hans, how did you tell me how you sold those those wooden watches that you manufactured in Taiwan, right? Or tell me how you manufactured that, and how did you get it to the drop shipping center as well? So it seems now, if I'm a product entrepreneur, all the skills I need, all the supply chains I need, all the markets I need are there. All I need now is the support. Now, bring that back to education. You talk about these functional skills that we learn. It's almost like I don't need to go to university to learn this stuff now. So I imagine what you're doing and kind of the conversations you have must challenge a lot of people to think about things like skills and education. How is that for you?
Yeah.
What kind of conversations do you have around this?
So I often, when I talk to universities about, say, entrepreneurship or doing programs, I often hear that they want to do their own thing, right? So University A will only allow current students or alumni of that university to join their program, and University B will try to compete and do the same thing. So university, again, still operates in this kind of exclusive club. That hasn't changed in the last few hundred years. But if you look at the world today in business, it's very much cross-border collaboration. Many teams are now born remote working as a norm, right? So this started obviously maybe first in Silicon Valley with some startups that have employee software engineers all over the world, and you hear about those kind of stories, and now it's kind of people are waking up to this new reality that you might have to do that for your next job. And some companies are now saying you can work remotely forever, right?
Well, Twitter is an example, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that movement is not going to slow, because companies look at their, their balance sheets. That why am I owning properties anymore? Like, I'm not a real estate company. Why should I have these huge campuses? And I used to work in one of those campuses, and it's kind of funny. You physically have to go from one building to the next, and is this really that much value where you don't even meet some of your colleagues anyway? And if again, I'm not saying that there's no value in terms of physical in-person interaction. I think if you look at the communication, verbal, non-verbal, facial expression, my hand gestures, all that adds to the experience, right? I think some things have to fundamentally change around skill development, and there's a kind of business category now called the last mile training providers, right? So if you think about General Assembly, for example, that's one of the companies going to emerge out of this trend. Is they say, okay, you don't have to go to a university, do a 4-year degree in computer science. If you just want to be a web developer, you can come through our boot camp, 3 months, intense, and then we give you some real practical training. And if you look at the actual curriculum time and practice time, is actually equivalent to the whole year of semester. Well, two semesters of work, because the way university works is quite inefficient, right? So university students,
all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, they only have 26 weeks of lectures, 26 weeks. And most of the time that real estate, the physical building is not being used.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make sense, right? Just from utilization point of view, it seems to be extremely inefficient. And if you think about the experience that people have, sure, you can go there to find yourself. There's also the social aspects of having peers and, social, student clubs. And there's a lot of things going on for a young person. But I think you're already saying that, for example, Stanford is talking about a different type of program where you don't have to finish in one go. Maybe you can finish in 6, I don't know how many years, but it's more than 4 years. And then have internships and work experiences integrated into their degree. And if you look at
some of
for
these
example,
guys, I just want to bring up just for the audience to see some of the photos as well. You've had some of these guys over at your factory as well. Maybe we can bring up the Instagram feed. Maybe have a look at some of those. So I was looking at you have these courses. Obviously, the great thing about these spaces, dream factories. You can get people in, and if we can just, the one that caught my eye, Hans, and maybe you can show me. This is about that one there, right on the screen. Not this one. No, not this one. So there you go. So let's bring this one up here. This was an
Yeah.
audio. I think just bring this one up now. Let's get this photo up. So this is, if we can just scroll up the description so we can have a look, and maybe you can talk us through, because it was audio and it was music. Obviously, it naturally caught my eye. A workshop as well. I mean, even giving it in these very, you talk about last mile, it's very specific skills that we can learn. What's the
Yeah.
story
So
here?
so Rob, he's like a electronics enthusiast, or he's actually more than that. He's just an engineer. We work with people like Rob, as we call it third-party instructors. So they come, they bring their own curriculum. Oftentimes they bring their own community, and he's running like a electronics workshop for building like a audio synthesizer. So for people who have never seen electronics in their life, this is actually quite fun, right? Compared to my experience when I was in undergrad, learning electronics from textbooks.
Yeah,
come on.
I remember those diagrams. Yeah. No wonder
and
that
just
not many
not
people got into it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I look at the way it's being taught, and even so, when I was in undergrad, the whole school of engineering only has about 15% of females, girls.
Yeah.
Right? And you say, okay, what's the problem? Like, why are no girls being drawn into engineering? And I think a lot of it has to be the way it's being taught, right? So imagine if you teach electronics like with audio, like music, with fashion, and it's a little bit more relatable rather than just from a textbook. I think more people will enjoy it. And
Yeah.
it
Demystifying
doesn't
as
have to
well,
be this.
isn't it? That's
Yeah,
beautiful.
demystifying a little bit. And I think there has to be a better way of introducing new concepts to people that's really kind of hands-on, right? So
Yeah. Well, let's
project-based
put it into the
learning.
context of the
Yeah.
pandemic as well, because if we go back to the Instagram feed and pulling out some of your stories here as well, a good example, obviously now we've had many supply chain issues with
Yeah.
face masks, with shields and medical equipment. And what tends to happen is people look to the big suppliers, the 3Ms, to solve this. However, there are plenty of examples, and some of them coming from your community, of people who've done this in a very sort of product engineer or product entrepreneur, I should say. Could be a small solution, could be a small idea that just scales, the accidental entrepreneur as well. Tell us the story of this one here, and if we can scroll up, have a look at the description, maybe we can get some context. What happened here, Hans?
Yeah. So
And bear in mind, some people can't see this image, so
yeah.
please describe.
So during the it's still ongoing actually, the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, what happened was the global supply chain of medical device, PPE, personal protective equipment, and in some cases the ventilators are in short supply. So makers around the world have responded really quickly, almost simultaneously. Like some are coordinated, some are not. And in this case, you're basically someone designed those valve at the top. So you see those two valves attached to a snorkeling mask. So this particular equipment is actually meant to be designed for recreational purposes. So some people don't like to imagine snorkeling, right? Some people are not like comfortable inhaling through their mouth. So this is a French company that have this snorkeling mask. Essentially, you can breathe through your nose. So this has been repurposed to be a effective device for that will basically get a patient to be breathing again. It's like a attachment to the ventilator.
And 3D printed?
So the valve at the top are 3D printed. Yeah.
Right. Okay. I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? This is really agile in practice, where I see often companies, and I suppose even engineers struggle with this as well, is the payoff between perfect and optimal, in the sense that you have what would be a perfect solution, which would be a mask manufactured from scratch, and yet optimal is almost like the classic Apollo 13 story, where they're trying to find a way to reduce the carbon dioxide levels in the the spacecraft, and they were
Yeah.
getting ventilator tubes and vacuum cleaner, equipment, and trying to cobble together a solution. But it works as well. How much of that is really helping people understand that that is actually a bona fide and good solution? Because I know we tend to think we look for the perfect solution. How
Yeah.
much do you have to sort of unlearn that?
Yeah. I think in a crisis, people say the necessity is mother of inventions, right? So sometimes when you have to make things happen,
Mm,
people are actually quite creative, right? Um, if you throw away all the rules and you say, no, I need to save this patient's life, and this is given what I have, how do I make it work? Um, and I think makers have this again. I don't think it's the skill that's different. It's really the mindset. Makers are not necessarily big manufacturing companies are able to hack things and make it work.
mm,
Again, fit for purpose, to save lives. So makers around the world have this kind of shared vision and common purpose, and that's quite phenomenal because we actually launched a PPE face shield. So essentially, a face shield is not a face mask; it's basically a piece of plastic in front of your face. We launched that product within a week.
a week?
Yeah,
When you say launch, you mean what? Getting it, shipping it?
designing and having prototypes and getting ready to ship. Yep, within a week. That was phenomenal. And the reason we
Wow.
could do that is because makerspaces around the world are sharing files,
Right,
open
right,
source,
right.
and
A
we
week.
was
How long
yeah,
would that be in the real world? I mean, when I say the real world,
months.
I mean corporate. Yeah,
Yeah. So
months.
for example, we have there are similar parallel efforts by large corporations, um, automotive companies in
Yeah,
Victoria,
yeah.
and we actually bet those companies, and those companies are Fortune 50 companies, and they have way more resources, um, dedicated engineers, and yet our PPE. So again, PPE facial has no intellectual property. It's really simple. There's
Mm,
many ways you can make it, but we launched this product quicker, and we got into the hands of the in the hospital and the aged care and community service workers quicker than those big companies because we know that we can do things fast. So
mm. Is it just a case
and
of doing it
also
faster? Is it really just speed? I mean, it's a lot more than speed, isn't it? Because they have 100 times the resources that you have, and
but then those engineers they see that as a job, right? Whereas we
mm,
see that as a mission.
yeah. Is it that you guys are putting in more hours, or is it that you're thinking about it differently? I mean, the fact that it's a mission, how does that change the way that you look at the problem?
I think this is a good question. I think it's not the so without going into all the technical details, large companies are good at making things. Their processes are good at making things that in high volume. So when you want to make many of the same parts, you have many kind of engineering reviews and gates, and you do things in kind of a waterfall, right? Whereas we were doing things in Asia. We quickly prototyped, and I was in the hospital showing it to doctors and nurses in ICU really quickly within a few days
Hmm.
because we really understand that we had to get end user feedback. And the end user from the doctors, they would say, well, your face visor wasn't long enough. It didn't cover my side. And we were able to iterate really quickly. So I think large corporations, they are not as used to kind of this agile product development cycles.
Hmm.
Again, there's a reason for that because for them, if they might want to launch a product into the market, usually they operate with, I don't know, a few years lead time in terms of developing vehicle, right? And this is not a vehicle. This is something they can do in a matter of days. So I think, again, it's mindset. It's not
Yeah,
because they
yeah.
don't have this.
A lot of it I see as well, Hans. A lot is ownership, isn't it, of the project? Like
Yeah,
if you had, I mean, the classic situation in a corporate, I know it's changing now and they're becoming more agile, is the classic waterfall value chain where the engineer creates the face mask and then the marketing team work on it and then the sales channels distribute it, etc.
yeah,
And yet really the problem is with that is that you really this handoff extenuates the whole process by multiple factors. And yet if it's the same person who is designing it and then taking it to the doctor and hearing the feedback, they then go, okay, I got to take that back. It's almost Edison style, taking that back to
Yeah.
the labs and saying, right, improve it, iterating, bring it back, iterating,
Yes.
bring it back. And it's a mindset in the sense that if you own it, you want to get feedback.
Yeah.
And it's the same as for developers writing code, or it is for somebody making a face mask, isn't it? Is that
Right.
not being afraid of getting feedback, because we can easily, once we have resources, distance ourselves from the bad news, if you like. And yet
Yeah.
really, real development happen when you face up to the problems and own them
Yes.
and
Now,
invite them, right?
yeah. And I work in large corporations before, and so I know this from my own experience is that um, unless the person driving the project is really passionate um, and it's coming kind of from the leadership of the company, and imagine, okay, in a large corporation, this kind of project wouldn't be driven by the CEO; it would just be driven by one of the manager, middle management, right? So the middle management is like, okay, is this a good idea? Am I stepping out of bound? They're going to worry about
Mm.
repercussions if it failed. It's going to look bad, and this kind of goes back to innovation's dilemma. A lot of times, those large corporations, because there's so much riding on their brand, they're unable to take risks. And everything, like for example, a press release may have to be approved by the legal team in the overseas headquarters. That's why I can't name names here, because
Yeah,
there's no
we all know
formal
what you're talking
agreement.
about. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we all know. We
And
all understand.
and I think that slow things down, right?
Yeah.
Because again, in some areas, I think this is where small companies or startups can win, is really the speed, right? That's the only competitive advantage.
Yeah.
We don't have that many people. We work with our tech, the people who's manufacturing in the same team. So I think if you want to think about the barrier, I would say to put it in a more technical category, it would be design for manufacturing, DFM, right? Design for manufacturing is kind of a lost art in the West, because traditionally, if you see all the factories are in China, Southeast Asia, a lot of engineers who design products don't actually see how things are made.
Yeah.
So I had this problem when I was at SanDisk. I remember this. We had some issues in the factory in Shanghai, right? Factory in Shanghai and headquartered in Milpitas, California. They were saying, "Oh, we have this PCB warping." But I was like, "Well, what do you mean? I've never seen it. Like, what do you mean? Like, what?" It's really hard to comprehend the problem statement, right? So essentially, you imagine a piece of substrate, which is like the side, if the heat is not distributed properly, it will cause mechanical stress. But again, if you have the engineers who's never been to the factory in China, have seen those kind of problem statements, how do you expect them to design products that are meant to be perfect? There's no perfect product. So the disconnection between design and manufacturing is actually causing a lot of problems.
Yeah. So much of that is really, it comes down to not being in the same place, right? At the end of the day,
Yeah,
for a lot of these, or even, even if it was done virtually, having the same communications base, right? There's a
yeah,
quote that you mentioned in your pitch deck, and I want to bring it up. So Kevin Ashton, obviously associated with MIT, he said that beginning is hard, continuing is harder, creation is a long journey where most turns are wrong and most ends are dead. And obviously, a lot of what we talked about in the development process really encapsulates that. I want to know, Hans, in the context of your journey, how that has happened, because you have made
yeah.
more mistakes than anybody else, which is really a moniker of success, I believe. We've all made a lot of mistakes. Tell us about the wrong turns and the dead ends, in particular with FAB9 and your sort of, your dream factory journey. Is that I'm really interested in what kind of assumptions did you make at the beginning that turned out not to be true? What did you learn? Those kind of pivots or things which you know now that you didn't know when you started out.
Yeah, good question. Great question. There are so many mistakes I've made, and I'll probably highlight a few things. Initially, I thought my customers were going to be a bunch of startup founders and want to, be the next Elon Musk and, coming to me and, make things. And what I realized is so basically, I thought it was going to be more people coming to the makerspace for commercial reasons, but I think you touched on this already. But what happens is a lot of people come as hobbyists. They have no real aspiration to build companies. They just enjoy, working, or they enjoy making the laser cut keyboard. There's many kind of, passion projects that they have in their mind, but they don't necessarily want to quit their day job to come and pursue that full time. So I initially didn't understand this. I thought if I were to build for myself, and I think just not, but because we build a physical brick and mortar space, right? It's kind of hard. It's not like software you can easily test a product. Like when I was explaining to most people, even today, on the street of Melbourne, a makerspace, most of the time I have to explain what it is. People don't quite get it, right? We're quite new, so I've had a lot of challenges communicating what is a makerspace. Number one, how does that work? And number two, what is the value proposition? And it's not so simple. If I say I'm building a gym, a health club, most people will get it, right? But imagine 30 years ago, you don't say, well, why should I pay to exercise? I can just go to the park, right? But then there's some personalities in bodybuilding, like, in Hollywood and LA kind of popularize some of those, the lifestyle. So what essentially they're selling is not the equipment, it's the lifestyle. So I didn't quite understand this from a marketing point of view.
And so now, how do you, like, if you were to advise yourself starting out at the beginning of your journey with the space and FAB9 and the factory, knowing what you know now, how would you advise the younger Hans on that journey? So I'm going to save you a lot of time here.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
One lesson.
I don't know if I've done it again because we almost ran out of money several times.
Yeah.
And even now during coronavirus, funding is a real challenge. And again, it's just me, it's universal. It doesn't matter if you're doing software, hardware. Maybe there are a few growth sectors like Zoom, right? And I think telemedicine, healthcare. Also, I think education will have to change. Yeah. I think if I were to give myself an advice is, I would say really look after the mental health of the, founder. Mental health is a real problem.
It's tough, man.
It's really tough. And be surrounded by your kind of support network, and can be your friends, family, but then just you have to be mindful that you're also putting them through a lot of stress. I didn't understand this before. I can tell you that even today, my father, my dad doesn't quite understand why I want to quit SanDisk or, a corporate America, high paying, highly prestigious brand, career, put that throw that away and then start my own thing in something that's not really proven. So I think this could be a generational thing. Maybe he spent his whole career literally in one industry. He only switched from the supplier to the buyer. Does that make sense? He went from selling stuff to buying stuff as a procurement. That's what he did. Extremely safe.
Taiwanese as well?
Yeah.
So SanDisk, working for an electronics manufacturer, for example, would have been, a real career move as well. So that would have been a classic career path for a young Taiwanese kid, right? Growing up. And then you went and started your own business.
Yeah, because Taiwan, like double E, electronics, that's the thing, right? Like you have TSMC and all those great companies, right? So
you make a valid point. I feel now that the whole journey as well about wellness, mental health, it is tough. I mean, the classic, the phrase quote by Mike Tyson is, that everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yeah,
and being an entrepreneur is getting punched in the face every single day. Like, can you take it? And it's tough. And in many ways, that's why we need communities and entrepreneurship is very much glamorized for all the reasons we've talked about before.
Yeah.
But if you have a support network, you can make through it, because almost everybody has been through this journey as an entrepreneur. There are obviously many, many stories of people that we don't know about, but they've all faced this challenge, right? And that's why
Yeah.
it's great to be with people, because they will say, look, this is exactly how I felt. And you have those doubts, don't you? Because you've got to explain to your father, and you've got to explain to your old colleagues, like, how's it going now? Like, okay, we're going to have the family reunion, somebody's getting married, and I've got to talk about what you're doing now, Hans, and why did you leave Sandisk, and all this kind of thing. Everybody faces this, and that's why we need this community as well.
Yeah.
But there's a bigger sort of like issue now about education, and I know you're really passionate about education, and we're not talking about education necessarily as schooling, right? And this whole conversation now about entrepreneurship, about taking risk, creativity, what kind of skills, and it's something that you're really in the heart of as well. You're creating the modern schools effectively in these spaces, but also, very aware that this needs to go online as well, for it to be relevant to a bigger group of people. So can you share with us some of the plans of what's coming next? Because I'm sure there's a lot of, like with these kind of projects, there's a lot of diverse people who have an interest in what you're going to talk about now, who may not be from your world, but say, hey, that is really relevant to me. So tell us about what comes next.
Yeah, so I'm a big believer in kind of hands-on learning or project-based learning. So for people who don't know, most people, if you look at education, it hasn't really changed much in the last 100 years. It used to be, writing on the chalk on the blackboard, and then one way lecturing, right? That's called lecture, meaning your
we
teacher
do have
knows.
Interactive blackboards now.
The premise is the teacher knows more than the student, so the teacher passes on knowledge to the student, right? That's kind of the way it's been designed. It hasn't really changed. But now with information technology, again, I'm speaking in general terms, you have Google, you have YouTube. You can just find information when you need it. You don't need to memorize it, right? So I'm a big fan of project-based learning, meaning you start something, you have a project as 4 P's: so project, passion, peers, peer-to-peer learning, and then the last P is play. So play is inherent in human nature. And you have people now doing, for example, Lego play for professionals. Again, this is not kids, right? Because being playful sometimes it helps you come up with new ideas.
Absolutely.
Again, this is not me, Hans Chen, saying this. There's a lot of evidence-based research done around this. I think for me, it's more like when you're relaxed, when you're enjoying the process, your mind can open up to new possibilities and new ideas. So what I'm planning to do next is based on everything I've learned in the last few years and all the research papers I've read and all the case studies that's being done around the world, from MIT Media Lab, and they've done really great research, is to say, how do we make the maker education or the maker process more accessible to anybody in the world? So they don't have to come to FAB9 physically, right? So that's part of my bigger vision of we provide some, for example, could be like video on demand lessons, and then with some physical kit, because I don't see this I don't want the experience to be just coding like on a laptop. But that's not the point. But imagining if somebody has to tinker with some electronics. And actually, this is a good way to talk about. BBC Microbit has done this fantastic project in the UK. They've given a little tiny microcontroller to every single kid in the UK and say, okay, tinker with technology, learn more about computational thinking. They didn't say become a software engineer. Okay, that's not the point. And it's been phenomenal. And a lot of people say, okay, well, I'm not afraid of technology. I can do what the technology can do what I want it to do. So I'm not going to become a passive consumer. And that's what the problem in the world today is. We've been brainwashed billions of dollars of advertising dollars to tell us, oh, we're not good looking enough, we're too fat, we're not ugly, we need makeup, you're too fat, you're not successful, You're not living this kind of Instagram celebrity lifestyle. Like you need to spend, and you're gonna be happy. But it's not the case, right? We
Yeah.
know buying bigger houses, bigger cars is not gonna make you happier.
Yeah.
But creation is something that you can feel very, this kind of a sense of achievement. And if you look at it, how kids learn, it's very joyful. Learning should be very joyful, right?
Yeah.
And
It's
I
like a
think
creative fight club.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and I get a lot of kick out of seeing my vision coming to life.
Yeah.
And I think and again, future of work is not going to just be you do one thing for 30 years. It's more likely to be project based, right? Again, project based learning, project based work. I think it lends itself well to preparing people for the unknown, because a lot of job titles haven't even been created.
Yeah. Yeah. That's real agile, isn't it? It's that agility that work is what you do rather than a place you go.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, now a lot of people are asking questions. On the one hand, you've got people like yourself who are fire starters within the community. And then you have the large corporations like Twitter saying you can work from home, Google saying you don't need a degree, Stanford saying we need to rethink how we do this. There's a lot of pieces coming together, isn't it? And they're not all coming from the same space. It's not coming from the
Right.
top, it's not necessarily coming from the bottom, but many, many people converging. There isn't really a name for it yet, but I feel like if you look historically back at change, even the Reformation, which was, the liberation of thought driven by the printing press, for example, that small device that was developed initially from minting coins to printing paper and the democratization of knowledge,
Yeah.
is that, what that created was this whole sort of like, this momentum in change, and it didn't have a name, but lots of different events happened at the same time, and we're at this space
Right.
now. I feel it's happening, isn't it? Nobody called it the Reformation back then. It was like 100 years later.
Right.
Historians said, "Okay, we're going to put
It's a
all of this in a bucket."
movement. Yeah.
Exactly.
Because the way I think about it is like this podcast. In the past, you and I would have to be in a studio.
Yeah.
We have to be in this really fancy, acoustically isolated space. And I have to probably talk to your producer, negotiate a lot of things,
Yeah.
rather than transacting on the internet, right? And I think if I look at the long arch of technology, it's really about empowering people. Doesn't matter if it's a smartphone, laptop, or now with machine learning AI, it's about empowering people so you can be more creative. So you're not doing that kind of, we all used to be farmers, right? We
Yeah.
used to be spending most of our time producing food.
Yeah.
And now if you look at some of the people doing manual labor, it's not very inspiring, right? What if
Yeah.
those people are, retrained or upskilled to be creating new services and products? I think it's great as a great progress for humanity, really, to get people to do what they love to do, which is using their creativity, and not just do this job. And if you look at a lot of companies that used to design roles, is really say, hey, do the same thing over and over again, so be repetitive, so you gain some efficiency.
Mm.
So that's how the whole education system has been created, is to put you in pigeonholes, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's kind
Exactly.
of what has been in the last 100 years, and you create those kind of barrier to entry. For example, you have in the law profession you have bar, right? In the accounting profession you have CFA. But today, if you want to be a creator, there's no stamp, right? It's up to the market, right? If the market wants your skills and services and your ideas, then you can trade, right? So when I say trade, meaning you can collaborate, you can work. There's commerce behind it.
Yeah.
So I think we live in an extraordinary time. I think the technology is all here. I think what's lacking is not the technology, it's the skills.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Hans, listen, you've planted a flag now, and people are going to rally round. You put yourself out there. I mean, obviously, you have the physical space, and that will be back online, obviously, when the crisis, the pandemic, starts to ease. But you also have this much bigger online space which you're building as well. You planted the flag, people want to rally around. What kind of people do you want to hear from? Because I guess in any kind of movement, it's really about attracting diverse opinions as well, who may not be electrical engineers or may not have
Right.
worked, in even like manual manufacturers, there's product entrepreneurs as well. What kind of people do you want to hear from to reach out to you?
I think for anyone who's interested in kind of future of work and what something you and I have discussed, the future of education, maybe not use the word education, maybe just learning. I'm a big fan of lifelong learning. I think you can be educated, but you can be school but not educated, right? So did I say the right way?
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, so you can go to school but not being educated. You still cannot be an independent thinker. I would love to hear from people who are passionate about lifelong learning. That's a big term. That's kind of umbrella term. Can be kindergarten, K-12, higher education. It doesn't really matter. I'm really more interested in the pedagogy, how you learn rather than what you learn.
Yeah.
And we're gonna become experts at this. Um, I think again, I'm not alone. I'm reading all those different um, places where companies are popping up and trying to address specific needs from preschool all the way to higher education. There's different models now, and people have choices now, right?
Mm.
So I think this is a great time to. I think in general, there's a great time to become entrepreneur. This because in the downturn, what I'm seeing is there's some layoffs and in different industries, and there's lots of talents. So your talent pool is bigger, and people who really want to start companies now, they really mean it.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Right? And
Fantastic. Love it. It's been a good conversation with you, Hans. I feel we
thank you so
share
much.
a lot of similar views as well. And we're not alone. Absolutely. There's a lot of people out there. Best way to get hold of you, Hans? Best way to reach out? Are you good with LinkedIn? Would that be?
Yeah, LinkedIn. I'm more active on LinkedIn. I'm not really a Twitter user. I
Yeah.
think some of the conversation there is quite toxic,
Yeah.
um, too polarized, and it's just waste of my time. LinkedIn
Yeah.
is great. So Hans ML Chang, Chang. You find me. FAB9, FAB number 9.
That is Hans Chang, everybody, from FAB9. Really enjoyed our conversation today, and hopefully you can update us in the future as well on this journey. This
Yeah.
journey, and like we said, there's a lot of wrong turns and dead ends, but it's just staying in the game and eventually building that momentum. People will join that journey along the way as well. So I'm sure there are a lot of stories to share in the future. If you've enjoyed this conversation, a couple of things to think about taking this forward. Firstly, reach out to Hans on LinkedIn. That's Hans ML Chang. I'm sure he'd be happy to hear your thoughts and your comments as well. And secondly, if you're following us on Spotify or iTunes, Pitchdeck Asia is the place to go, where we host the stories of startup entrepreneurs, people, the crazy ones, even people like Hans who have a dream, who are crazy enough, dare to have a dream, or dare to be vulnerable, dare to put themselves out there as well, and share their vision with us as well. So I've really enjoyed that conversation today. My name's Graham Brown. We're signing out. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Graham.